All right, well, welcome to our Nature Network speaker series tonight, everybody. First of all, I would just like to say that Nature Alberta acknowledges that the land we now know as Alberta resides within Treaty 6, 7, and 8, as well as portions of Treaties 4 and 10, and is the ancestral and traditional territory of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We have a responsibility to care for these lands and waters and to honor the history and culture of those who have been here for generations. Now, to introduce our speaker for the evening, Ellie Annett is an educator with the Alberta Prairie Conservation Forum, dedicated to teaching students from kindergarten to grade 12 about the importance and conservation of Alberta's grasslands. Ellie carries a passion for environmental conservation and raising awareness of Indigenous cultures, and an active member of the Old Man Watershed Council. As a practicing artist, Ellie finds inspiration in nature and spends her free time exploring the landscape through hiking and camping. And with that, I will turn it over to her.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody. I'm looking really forward to filling you in on how incredible our grasslands are as a biome. So ask the questions that you want to ask and put them in the chat, and Nick will let me know about them at the very end here. So I'm just going to share our presentation. So let me just, yeah. So to begin with, this presentation is called Deep Roots for two main reasons. And one you can kind of already guess is that the beautiful fescue grasses that we have here on the Alberta grasslands have roots that extend very, very deep into the soil. And that's because they need to reach down to get all of that nutrients as best as they can. And they need to stay really hardy and really strong throughout our really dynamic weather. So that's one reason we call this deep roots. And other is our culture as being residents of the Alberta grasslands, is we as people, prairie people I like to call us, who live here, we have a really deep-seated connection, deep-rooted connection to where we live. It goes back many, many generations. And if you are an Indigenous person, it goes back thousands. So that's another reason why we call this deep roots. So continuing on, if we look at these incredible roots, when I deliver this to children, they always think, that's like Cousin It, or, you know, that looked just like a wig. And I say, well, it kind of is, right? Like, I mean, it's really long and hairy. These roots are incredible. They do incredible things. And because of this root system and the strength that these fescue grasses hold in our grasslands, they help keep a lot of different lives sustained throughout our grasslands. So we'll talk more about that in a minute. But you can see here just how deep they go. I found this great picture. So this is about, we'll call an average size male. And you'll see they're even longer than he is tall. And they are in fact so long that they have to be tied up in this exhibit. So people can see the different species of grasses and just how deep those roots go. Sure wish my flowers would grow roots like that, but they don't. So what is a grassland? Very simple, very straightforward. It's all in the name. It's a land that's dominated by grass. And what's really great is that we are not the only grassland in the world. They're all around. One of them is, in fact, the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania. And you can see why this is considered a grassland. It is, again, grass, or a land dominated by grass. There will be other features too, like the trees and even hills and mountains, but particularly the majority is grass. And what's great about it is that it can withstand the grazing for wildlife, such as these animals here. Another one is the Hulenbohr grassland, and that's in China. It, as you can see, again, dominated by grass, really green, really lush, in ways very different than our grassland, but again, you can kind of tell very similar too, right? You could almost say this could be Alberta in a very rainy season. But again, the idea of it being dominated by grass and a great place for livestock to roam is exactly what connects it to our grasslands. This one here, this is called the Llanos grassland, and it's in Venezuela and Colombia. And it looks very similar to our grassland again, right? So that word llanos, it's Spanish for plains. So they're very wide stretching grasslands that stretch across the northern part of South America, and they occupy Western Venezuela and northeastern Colombia. And they have approximately 570,000 square kilometers, and they border along the Andes to the north and west, and the Guaviare River and the Amazon River basin to the south, and the lower Orocino River and the Guiana Highlands to the east. So they're very large. But they're not as great as this grassland. This is ours, and it is so dynamic. It is so wondrous. It hosts so much life. And this is the one we're going to learn a little bit more about today. So our grasslands is a natural region, and natural regions are areas that are grouped together because they have similar climate, plants, and landforms. And our grasslands region is found in that southeastern part of Alberta, so down there. And it covers about 14.5% of the province, which is the same as saying 24 million acres. And that's quite large. So just to give you a more familiar idea of something you can connect to a little bit better, I want you to have a look at this map here of Southeast Asia. And we're going to look for Korea, in fact, South Korea. So South Korea has the same land size as our grasslands. They're about the same, which is pretty incredible. So thinking about our grasslands, we have a lot of different types of species of grass. In fact, there's about 115 different species. And a lot of the plants you find in this natural region are various different types of grasses. And on top of our grasses, there's more. In fact, there are these wonderful pieces of environment called forbs. And at forbs, and that's spelled F-O-R-B-S, are by definition a very leafy flowering plant that provide digestible energy and nutrients for animals. So wildflowers typically are considered forbs. Sorry, I should go back. That one there is called Gaillardia, and this one blooms prettier, late spring. And here you'll see a whole field of these beautiful forbs, and they usually grow together. This picture here is taken in Waterton Lakes National Park, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But you'll see some Gaillardia here, kind of down in the bottom left and through here. Lupin is this beautiful purple flower. Sticky geranium and northern Hedi Sarum are the pink flowers, kind of speckled throughout. And two, I mentioned our indigenous population. They are really the land keepers who are, I don't want to say responsible, but we're all responsible, but really have used this land the most in terms of their culture and survival. And they too are no stranger to the use of different forbs and plants for medicinal or cultural practices. So this one here is called goldenrod, and they would oftentimes use it to make a tea when they have an upset stomach. And this one here is balsam root. It's used by the indigenous people to help cure burns. So going back to how we have so many different features in our grasslands, when we think about Alberta, or you mention Alberta to somebody else, or rather our grasslands, they would think, oh, it's just flat and boring, but it is anything but. We have so many different features that make it really unlike any other place in the world. We have these incredible hoodoos, we have valleys, we have coulees. So it really is quite individual. So usually when people think grasslands, like I said, they think that maybe they're boring, but that's usually somebody who doesn't have the experience to live and be on the grasslands, or hasn't had the opportunity to be up and close and explore and experience them. And it's too bad that we don't have that today, but some of us who are in our grasslands, some of our viewers may well be, we're quite lucky. And if you haven't, I'll give you a list of wonderful places to come visit maybe this summer in our grasslands that you can come and see it for yourself. So how do we get so many different types of plants, of wildlife, and even sometimes even the landforms? And that it's all because of this wonderful thing called biodiversity. Now, this is usually, we can't do this today because you're all at your homes. This is usually when I get my students to look around and look at each other because they play a game to help them understand one of the 3 parts of biodiversity. So there's 3 important factors that contribute to having incredible biodiversity. And the very first one is what we call genetic biodiversity. So as we look at these pictures here, you can see that these people are all of the same species in their own way, right? So we have humans here, but as we look at them, we notice they're different. Some are taller, some are shorter, some have different color skin, some have different color hair, their colors of eyes are different. Over here with our corn, it's the same thing. We know the species is corn, but we do know that they're different types. Sometimes they even taste different. Forbs as well, we just learned they are under the species of forbs, but they all are different kinds. And the best one really is canine, right? We know of dogs all the time. We see them everywhere, but they're all different. So that is one of the really first important parts of having really strong biodiversity, is having that diversity within a species. We need that. The second one is, if we have a good look at this picture, we'll see that we have all these different species living together in an area. And they all kind of assist and they help one another live and thrive and grow. Maybe they eat one another for food because they're the way they're organized on the food chain. The different plants assist them in different ways, even the insects, different types of trees. So that's the second feature to having really strong, good biodiversity. That's having a diversity of species. Now, the thing is with these species, they all need a place to live. So if we have a good look at this picture here, you will see a whole variety of different spaces that would be wonderful for all of those species to live. So maybe those shrubs we see would be great habitat for different types of birds, or the tall grasses might be a good habitat for insects. There might be some burrows in the ground that we can't see. That's a great habitat for squirrels and badgers or even swift fox. So that is really important, that all these different species have places to live. So they need to have that variety of habitat. So if we put all 3 together, we have diversity within our species. And there's many different kinds of species, so diversity of species. And all those species need a place to live. You get a variety of habitat for them. If you have all 3 of these perfect things together and they're really juicy and they're really strong, you get an incredible place like this called Waterton Lakes National Park. So I'm sure some of you have been there. If you're lucky, you even live there, good grief. But it is an incredibly biologically diverse place. In fact, it is the most biologically diverse place in all of Alberta. So it contains over 1,000 species of plants, 62 species of mammals, and thousands of species of insects. And it is heavily protected because we want to keep that biodiversity living and thriving. So earlier I mentioned the fescue grasses have, really important jobs. And one of them is that inside the Waterton Lakes National Park, they really contribute to the variety of habitat and the different plant communities that they have in the park. And they are one of the biggest reasons why Waterton has all of that diversity, because there's so many of them and they provide so much. Like I said, variety of habitat. So Waterton too is an area that supports more species of grass, flowers and plants, animals, birds, and insects that you can't find in any other mountain ecosystem, even in Banff and Jasper. And what's really fascinating is that Waterton Lakes National Park is very small in comparison to Banff and Jasper, but it's way more biologically diverse. So if you have a chance this summer, go and see it. It's incredible. So too, you'll also find animals in Waterton Lakes National Park, like a badger, which you wouldn't really see in a mountainous ecosystem, right? And that is because of those fescue grasses and all the life that they support. So on top of that, it's not the only biologically diverse place in our grasslands. These ones here are very biologically diverse, and they're also protected. One being Bob Creek Wildland and one being the Black Creek Heritage Rangeland. And they're in Southwest Alberta, of course, where grasslands are. And you can absolutely see why they are protected. Look at all of that biodiversity, especially at the Black Creek Heritage Rangeland. all the different forbs, all the different grasses, the different trees. And what I tell students at this point is that usually if you see all of these different types of life in the plants and everything else, you're going to see a ton of wildlife. That is where they want to be. So more biologically diverse, it means more wildlife. That's their happy place. And so now that I have really pumped you up about the grasslands, I have to tell you the sad part about our grasslands is that we are actually losing them, which is really, really disappointing. And a little bit later, we'll talk more about why that is, but I want you to kind of understand the impact that is having on all of these species, but most importantly on biodiversity, because it's that trickle down effect, right? It's going to affect everything else along the way. So, like I said, one thing we know is that plants are very important because they support all these other living things. So if there's lots of plants, there's going to be lots of animals, birds, and insects. But today, our problem is that there's only 20% of our Alberta's grassland ecosystem remaining in its natural state, 20% only. So that means 80% of our original grassland is gone and vanished. So since that grassland has been lost, this means that a lot of the wildlife that relies on the grasslands have also lost a part of their original habitat. And we'll talk more about the importance of that. So let's put it into perspective, okay? So think of the house that you live in. You've got a bedroom, a couple of them, bathroom, maybe more than one, kitchen, maybe more than one if you're really wealthy, pretty lucky, and a living room in your house. And all of this helps you live. It keeps you comfortable. It keeps you happy. Everybody's thriving and hopefully in their home, right? Now I want you to imagine that someone came along and took your home, chopped off a bunch, or shoved it into a teeny tiny place because they needed the other area. That's going to make you feel pretty darn uncomfortable. You have so much less space, and you would be competing for that space for the rest of your family. Life would be awful. It would be uncomfortable. Everybody's mental health would likely decline. It just wouldn't be good. And you know what? That is the same. What happens with all of our different species of animals, plants, and insects, except it's a bigger deal. When those animals and different species do not have the space to survive and raise the young, they in fact die out. In fact, that's one of the biggest reasons why they become what's called a species at risk, which we'll talk about in a minute. A good example of this is called the chestnut-collared longspur. That is a bird you maybe might find on our grasslands, not as much anymore because they have been on a steep and steady decline since 1970 at the rate of more than 5% a year, and are now in fact listed as endangered because they are losing their habitat. It's the biggest threat to different species. Also, I apologize. I have a species sitting next to me right now, my dog, and she is whining. So she may make a noise, but we'll just call that, a sound effect. So I apologize. Anyway, so back to a species at risk. So what is it? If a plant, a bird, an animal, or amphibian or insect becomes a species at risk, it means that they're in danger of disappearing forever. And on our grasslands, we have so many of them, which we'll talk about, but there's one that I want us to focus on who really does need our help, and that's the burrowing owl. They're an incredible tiny little owl that are only about 20 centimeters tall, or about the size of your forearm. They don't have ear tufts like great horned owls, and they have long legs and spots on their back. They're so teeny tiny. So I was going to tell you what a forearm was, but I remember I'm not talking to children. I'm talking to adults. You guys know. Thank you. So anyhow, there's more to them than this. They, like their name suggests, are burrowing owls, and they live in holes in the ground. And these holes, they don't dig them. They are the laziest, but it's what makes them great. They're very smart. They wait for animals like a badger or a Richardson ground squirrel to build a burrow, leave the burrow, and then these guys move in. They're the ultimate mooch. And what's great is that they move into these burrows in groups, and this is where they'll raise their young. And you can see that they have great plumage, especially in this picture on the right, that really gives them good camouflage because they need it being so small and living on the ground. They're also really great hunters, and they hunt during the day and the night. They love to eat grasshoppers and beetles and small rodents like mice or voles, and you can see they found one. They're very, very quick and they're very agile, then they can catch insects really easily with their feet. They're very, very clever little guys. And so here are some fuzzy little babies. So keep in mind, this one here, the full grown one, is only 20 centimeters tall. So these guys are much tinier. In fact, they're about half the size. So when they're in their burrows, of course, they will definitely have their young. But the problem is that they have a low infant survival rate. Because they live on the ground and because they're so small, they're really, really easy prey for predators like hawks and eagles or coyotes and badgers and fox. So that also contributes to them being a species at risk. What's also really interesting, and I love this part, is that they are incredible migrators. Such a small little bird can migrate so far. So they will leave our grasslands around the end of August through mid-October, and they fly down over winter in Texas and around northern Mexico where it's nice and warm. So they should be coming back fairly soon. But I did mention that they are a species at risk. And one of those reasons is because where burrowing owls love to live is really a great place that we like to live, right? So things like city developments cause a lot of loss of habitat, pardon me, to our burrowing owls. But what I've learned, and it's really quite wonderful, is that there's several different rehab programs around the grasslands, one being at the Birds of Prey Center in Coaldale, and also the Calgary Zoo, I learned. They have a rehabilitation program for burrowing owls that if you find one on your farmland or wherever out in the wild, they will come and collect them and they will bring them to their center and they will help build the population and have them breed for a while, and then eventually they'll be released back out. Which made me think of this very cute little video. And the kids love this, and I know you guys will too. So this isn't from a local rehabilitation site. I just found this on TikTok, but I love it. So there's these little owlets being released back into a rehab space. These guys are full grown. Full grown and terrified, but they're very sweet.
Ellie, I think we might be having some trouble seeing the video.
That's what I asked because it says your screen sharing is paused. And I don't think that's right. Let's see if I can fix that. I think I have to, let me go back. I have to share that particular screen. Let's try that again. There they are. You can see them now, yeah?
Yes, we can. At least
Perfect.
I can.
Okay, let's hope it says you guys can, but let's hope that is true. So you can also too see a little bit of white fuzz on them. And I wonder if these are just juvenile. You know, they're not quite 100% adult, but they're still very teeny tiny. Okay. Here we go. Good. Okay, so like I was saying, there are other species at risk on our grasslands, and one is this beautiful hawk. If you're lucky enough to see it, it's called a ferruginous hawk. It's a beautiful, majestic, and fierce hunter, majestic bird, pardon me, that we see on our grasslands. It eats lots of different gophers and prefers to renovate its nests instead of build them. So he's pretty clever. This guy's here is called the swift fox. Now these, keep in mind, are different from the red-tailed fox. The red-tailed fox is the one you're going to see most of the time. Bigger, big, fluffy red tail, right? These guys in this picture are full grown. They only reach about 4 to 6 pounds, which is about the size of a house cat, and they are extremely fast. They reach up to about 60 kilometers an hour, and they are an omnivore, and they eat both meat and plants. I was actually mentioning this to my dad, who has lived on the grasslands for a very, very long time. And we have a family farm just outside of Brooks. And I asked him, have you ever seen one of these in all of your time? And he goes, one time only. And by the time what I figured out what it was gone, because they're so speedy and so quick. But he said it was just so tiny and small. 2, prairie rattlesnakes, believe it or not, are species at risk. Really, any reptile found on our grasslands is a species at risk. These ones here are very venomous, of course, and you know that rattling sound. So keep your eyes out, especially here in Lethbridge, we have a ton. This here is a short-horned lizard, and it's a very cute, teeny tiny little reptile. And he's only about as big as your thumb, so he doesn't get very large. This one here is called a northern leopard frog. And it has, it can vary from really intense green to a really pale brown. But if you were to check the spots, you'll notice that there's some cream colored outlines around the outside. Okay, and that's how you know it's a northern leopard frog. But again, like I said, they are a species at risk. So continuing on, I did mention, of course, the Indigenous people who have occupied this land for thousands of years. They have a major role on our grasslands. And I think it would be wrong to not acknowledge them and discuss a little bit of their culture as best as I can, not being an Indigenous person, about how the grasslands are very important and quite dire to their culture. So the original people of our grasslands are known as the Blackfoot Confederacy, and they're made up of 4 different tribes. So there's the Pagan, which is Piikani Nation. There's Amskapi Pikuni Nation, which are the Blackfeet. The Kainai Nation, which is the Blood, and that's the one that's closest to where I am, and it's the one that goes across the border down into Montana. And then there's the Siksika Nation, which is the Blackfoot. So long before Europeans made their way to Canada, the Indigenous people of the grasslands roamed this land and relying on all different kinds of the different plants and the animals for survival. So as well as survival, the Blackfoot Confederacy heavily relied on the grasslands for medicinal and for cultural practices, and they still do to this day. They believe that every living thing has a spirit and is to be cherished and respected. They have a belief that nature itself is very spiritual and is to be experienced in all ways, and all forms of life, I should say, are sacred. So one of their main sources, pardon me, of food and cultural practices was the bison. Communities would follow and move around and travel with the different bison herds. So they're very nomadic, and they would follow through the year and through all different seasons and using, of course, every single part of the animal they possibly could. However, that after contact, that was when Europeans met the Indigenous people when they traveled over, the Alberta grasslands became very negatively affected. So Europeans didn't really recognize, or maybe choose not to recognize, the importance of our grasslands to the Indigenous people's ways of life. And as a result, began to disrupt a lot of their cultural practices in many different ways. But one of them was the effect that buffalo hunting had on the Indigenous people's culture, killing 50,000 bison alone in 1873. So at this time, I'm going to show you an interview from a really awesome woman named Janita Tallman, who works with Parks Canada down in Waterton. She's Indigenous herself, and she's going to discuss a little bit more about the use of the buffalo, which actually the proper term is not buffalo. For the ones that we're thinking of, it's called bison. Actual buffalo are the ones that you find in Africa, the water buffalo. Ours here are called bison, but that term has just been so fluid, right? Anyways, we'll listen to a little video with her. Just...
Hence, I'd like to introduce you to Janita Tallman.
Starting to rain.
Hello, Janita.
Hi.
Janita, thank you for visiting us out in the grassland today. Can you explain to the students how the grassland is important to the Blackfoot people?
Sure, I'd love to do that. The grassland is very important to the Blackfoot people because we use this land and what grows on it to survive. We got medicines from it. We also survived off of the animals that use that for food. So that's another reason why it's very important. One of the main animals that we lived on long ago was buffalo, and they used to roam this area vastly. 50 million buffalo used to roam the plains. And if you were to look behind me and imagine 50 million buffalo behind me, the green of the grass would probably look brown. So just think about that and imagine that.
Janita, what types of plants were you talking about when you spoke about the medicines and some other uses for them?
Okay, so we used sage a lot, which was used as a mosquito repellent. So if you rub that all over your body or your arms, that would actually repel the mosquitoes. We would also use that plant as a tea to help us in times when we weren't feeling so great. We would also use sage as a smudge, which meant that we would burn it and use the incense for prayer. Another plant that we used in that same way was sweetgrass and sweet pine, which you can find in various places. We would also, one of my favorite plants that you can find close to the grasslands in some of the wetter areas would be the mint. And that is one of my favorite things to have, is a nice cup of warm tea.
Thank you, Janita. Thank you. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with the students about how important the grasslands are?
I would just like to share with them that it is very important to recognize the importance of protecting them, that we will have them here for hundreds of years and even thousands of years if we protect them.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And find our presentation again. So what I really love about that video is, this sounds terrible, but the very end, and not because it's the end, but because she talks about how as if we just take our time and protect our grasslands, they'll be here for thousands of years. And she's exactly right. We really, really will have them. So it wasn't until about the 1870s that Europeans first began to settle on the grasslands area in southern Alberta. And when homesteads were developed, much of that native prairie grass was lost. So the impact of European presence, it caused a lot of difficulties for the indigenous people in our area. However, there were some positive influences to the grasslands as well with their introduction. So settlers from Europe brought with them lots of different cultures and traditions and agriculture practices. And a lot of that influenced the development of our economy and society. And they established a lot of towns and farms and ranches and contributed growing to our population, which is really quite important. And honestly, a lot of us would not be here if it weren't for a lot of immigration from Europe. And the people that you see in these pictures here were one of the last generations of Canadians to see the grasslands in its natural state. And you can really tell, especially in this bottom right picture here, just what the grasslands would have looked like, long and beautiful, lush grasses. Unfortunately, they're chopping it down, but it's great to have documentation of it. Today, we still participate in activities established by our ancestors, like hunting and gathering of native plants and animals. This wonderful gentleman's name is William Singer III. He's got a really great Blackfoot name, but I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I would butcher it. And what he does is he has something called Nappy's Garden and the Cataoises seed garden out of Opakossin in Lethbridge, which is like a community center. And what he does is that he teaches children and adults as well about the importance of different native grasses, seeds, and how to forage them and use them for different uses that would have traditionally been used by the Indigenous people. He himself has a diet purely of what he finds out in the grassland. He's quite incredible. So just like Janita said, if we become more aware of how significant these grasslands are and we protect them, we can have them for thousands of years. And it's great to see people like William Singer really putting work into saving that. Another thing that we still do, that's a really big part of our culture is ranching. I have a great video here from a local rancher around Cardston, and he'll talk about why ranching needs grasslands. It needs our native grasses really desperately to keep livestock alive and well fed. And I'll explain that to you, or I won't, he will.
Bye-bye. Here, Jake, come here. My name is Roger Thompson. Me and my wife, we ranch down here in southern Alberta. We're about 20 miles southeast of Cardston, just barely north of the Montana border. I'm actually a fifth generation rancher. I got a son that wants to take the operation over eventually, and I got four really keen grandsons that act like they want to step into it too. One of them's actually really keen with the rope already. He's only 4. We run a cow-calf operation here. I'm running about 320 pairs. My son runs about another 100 pairs. We mostly run Red Angus. We're going to go out and bring about 150 head of yearlings in. There's about 7 or 8 bulls in that same group. We really appreciate the grasslands and the effect it has on our ranch and our cattle. It has to be maintained and well taken care of. And as stewards of the land, that's kind of our part, is trying to get it grazed. Another advantage of the native grassland is calving season. We calve in 2 different calving seasons. We calve early, March, April, then we also calve middle of May and June. You kick them out on this stuff and it's almost like magic. They grow up naturally, healthy. We appreciate the grasslands in another way is that it holds the snow. You leave enough grass out here, it'll hold the snow, and you know, moisture is the big issue in the country these days. There's been some tough times in ranching and stuff. You know, cattle weren't always as high as they are right now. We've got to figure on a job at least once every 6 to 7 years, it seems like. We've been lucky for the last few. It's things like that the families have to weather. But it's been a real tribute from my ancestors to keep it going anyway. It's nice to see my grandkids showing an interest in this because they just love coming out and riding horses with me. Hopefully we can keep things going for them so they can learn how to respect the land as much as we do.
Okay. I really love how he says that, you know, you take the cattle out onto the lease land and it's like magic. They come back all happy and fat. And that just really talks about how those grasses that we talked about are just so nutrient dense and so healthy and so hardy, right? That they can have that effect on cattle. So we know lots about our grasslands now, but we don't really know in depth about why we're losing our grasslands. And it results basically because of us, of human beings who are not coming out and respecting the land in the way that it needs to be respected. One of the things that is causing the loss of our grasslands is through oil and gas projects. So it requires a lot of ripping up of our land in order to place one of these, know the word, I always want to call it an oil hammer, but it is not. I believe it is a pump jack. Never mind. Sorry about that. It does. It requires a lot of people to come and rip out the ground and of course, digging into it. It disrupts a lot of habitat. And as we know, one of the major reasons or the biggest contributant to species losing their homes and things like that, or pardon me, species losing, becoming species at risk is because they are losing their habitat through things like this. Another one too is solar projects, which is, when I explain this to kids, it's a little confusing because they always think, you know what, solar is good. Like, what's wrong with it? And they're right. Solar is great. It's a great replacement for oil and gas, for non-renewable resources, I should say, rather, using the sun's power to harness energy, which is fantastic. However, as you can tell with this image here, you really have to rip up a lot of ground, a lot of habitat in order to place these solar farms around. Two, you can see as well with our windmills that we have, especially down here around Lethbridge. It's very windy, so this is a great place to harness the wind's energy. But again, it requires a lot of habitat removal to put these up. And on top of that, a lot of times these windmills will take out different birds. So it comes with a cost, right? Agriculture too is a great example of something that's really great, but it does have an effect on the grasslands, the habitats as well. So when, of course, they plow a field, seed it, get it ready for the spring, or take it down in the fall, they have to pass through this field several times to make it exactly what it is that they need in order to have a really successful yield. Really positive. We need agriculture, absolutely. However, the cost is that they have to rip up habitat not once, not twice, but several times throughout the year in order to get the field that they need. So just another point of view for looking at agriculture there. But like I was saying, though there is only 20% of our natural grasslands left, there are places all around the grasslands that are wildly protected and really well taken care of, that you can go and see what they look like in their natural state. And one of those places is Dinosaur Provincial Park, which is about, oh, how far from Calgary? It's east of Calgary, about 45 minutes outside of Brooks. And it's really great. It's in the Badlands. You might see some rattlesnakes. In fact, you will, so be careful about that. But it's an incredible place to be. All different species of birds. Great place to go. Another one, just down I believe it's the number 4 highway from Lethbridge, very close to the border and just past a town called Milk Rivers, Writing on Stone. It's a great place to see amazing grasslands in their natural state. And you'll see lots of hoodoos and coolies. You'll even spot all kinds of interesting birds like spotted towies and ferruginous hawks. On top of which, it's called Writing on Stone because it is a very sacred place to the Blackfoot Confederacy. And there's a lot of incredible Indigenous history to go see and learn about. Head Smashed and Buffalo Jump, really wonderful. It's near Fort Macleod, and it helps us discover more about the Blackfoot and Indigenous people of the area. You can learn more about the history and the connection between the Blackfoot people and the grasslands. And of course, again, it is protected, so you will see all different species there as well. Another great one is Blackfoot Crossing. This site is on traditional wintering ground for the Blackfoot Confederacy, and is a wonderful place to go to learn more about the Indigenous history and its dependency on the grasslands. Or if you are someone who doesn't really have the funds or really is just a staycation kind of person, you can simply just go out your back door, and you live on the prairies. If you live down here, you are on the grasslands, and you will see some of the most incredible animals that have made a rebound in terms of becoming a species at risk, like this guy. He's called a western meadowlark, and a bird that was almost lost because of pesticides, but because of the different modern improvements they've made in chemical use, they've made their population back, and nowadays you can't really go anywhere without seeing one. So it's quite incredible what we can do when we put our minds together and we try our best to respect the land as best as we can. So it's our responsibility to ensure that what remains in this area is protected and appreciated so that it can be here for generations to come. So the next time you're out in the grasslands, I hope you look at them with love and appreciation and you feel very proud to be here because they're an incredible part of who we are as people living in Alberta. So thank you guys so much. I hope you learned something. If you didn't, that's okay. You got to look at some pretty great pictures, but we're hoping you did.